Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into what is essentially an ancient crisis management manual. We're unpacking the Book of Titus, which is a really brief but incredibly dense letter written by the Apostle Paul. It's basically a masterclass in leadership selection, community building, and establishing order in a highly volatile environment. We're going to break down exactly how Paul instructed his proxy to take a completely chaotic society and mold it into a highly structured, productive community. Let's get into it.
Picture this. You're sent in as an executive fixer to manage a community that is historically described as liars, evil brutes, and lazy gluttons. Ouch, right? And the kicker is, this wasn't just an insult from an outsider. That quote is actually from one of their own local prophets, a guy named Epimenides. And Paul outright confirms in the text that this reputation was entirely accurate. So you're walking into a culture that is absolutely notorious for deceit, harsh behavior, and just a total lack of discipline.
So that brings us to Section 1. The mission in Crete, and the absolute necessity of establishing order. That was the daunting, real-world reality for a man named Titus.
Paul stationed Titus on the Mediterranean island of Crete, and he definitely wasn't there for a vacation. The default cultural setting there was deeply opposed to everything Paul's movement stood for. So Paul's primary directive for Titus was crystal clear. He needed to be the ultimate troubleshooter. The specific mandate was to straighten out what was left unfinished and to appoint elders in every single town. Paul knew that a big overarching vision is totally useless without steady, localized leadership. Titus had to travel town to town, figure out the mess, and install a permanent leadership framework that would actually last.
And there was zero time to waste. Titus wasn't working with a blank slate. He was walking into a buzzsaw of active, aggressive opposition. Paul specifically calls out a group of rebellious people and deceivers who were teaching things they had absolutely no business teaching. And if you look at their motive, it's all about dishonest gain. They were literally ruining entire households just to make a quick buck. This was the toxic baseline that Titus had to confront head-on and silence.
Which leads us to Section 2, Selecting Blameless Leaders. To fight back against that kind of toxic culture, Paul laid down some serious ground rules. He provides a remarkably strict set of qualifications for selecting local leaders or overseers. Because these individuals were going to be entrusted with God's work, the bar was set incredibly high. Paul tells Titus he needs to find individuals who are completely blameless. They couldn't reflect the broken, greedy culture of Crete. They had to be a stark contrast to it. So instead of being quick-tempered, violent, or chasing dishonest gain, these leaders had to be hospitable, upright, and heavily disciplined. They needed to be walking models of self-control.
But just being a good moral person wasn't enough. These leaders had to have a rock-solid grip on sound doctrine. Paul states they absolutely must hold firmly to the trustworthy message, exactly as it was taught. And why is that so crucial? Two reasons. First, so they could encourage the rest of the community through sound instruction. And second, so they could boldly and effectively shut down those deceptive opponents we just talked about.
Moving on to Section 3, the blueprint for the community. Paul didn't just stop at the top-tier leadership. He had rules for everyone.
He laid out highly targeted behavioral expectations for every single demographic to make sure the community actually functioned in harmony. You get this brilliant, interconnected structure here where everyone has a very specific role, but they're all united by core themes like integrity and self-control. Older men are told to be temperate. Older women are called to be reverent and to actively teach the younger women what is good, things like loving their families and being pure. Young men are urged to be self-controlled. Even slaves are addressed. They're told to be entirely trustworthy so that in every single way they make the teaching attractive. It's really a cascading network of mentorship and mutual responsibility.
Now, Titus couldn't just sit back and bark orders from a desk. Paul hits him with a really crucial reminder. He has to be the ultimate role model. In everything, set them an example by doing what is good. Titus had to demonstrate absolute integrity and seriousness in his own life. The strategy here is genius, honestly. His conduct needed to be so unimpeachable that his opponents would be put to shame simply because they literally had nothing bad to say about him.
All right, Section 4, the core motivation. Because let's be real, why would anyone actually follow all of these incredibly strict rules? Paul knows you can't just force behavioral change with a list of demands. There has to be an internal, transformational engine driving it all. So he draws this really stark contrast between their chaotic past and their brand new present reality. At one point, they were all foolish, disobedient, and enslaved by all kinds of passions, living in malice and envy. But their present? It's defined entirely by God's kindness and love. Paul emphasizes that they were saved entirely because of God's mercy, completely independent of their own righteous acts.
And it's exactly this grace that acts as their internal compass. Paul writes that the grace of God has appeared, and it literally teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions. It's the grace itself that gives them the internal power to reject the baseline culture of Crete and to instead live these upright, self-controlled lives while they wait for the appearing of Jesus Christ.
At the end of the day, the goal is total transformation. Jesus gave himself to redeem this community from wickedness and to purify a people for his very own. And what's the outcome of all that purification? They are supposed to be eager to do what is good. This isn't about reluctant obedience to a harsh boss. It's about a society that is genuinely enthusiastic about doing good works because of the immense mercy they've received. Finally, we hit Section 5, Navigating the Outside World, because this newly transformed community didn't just exist in a vacuum.
Their public conduct mattered immensely. They had to interact with a secular and, frankly, often hostile world. So Paul instructs them to be exemplary citizens. In total contrast to the rebellious deceivers from earlier, these folks are told to be subject to rulers and authorities. They're commanded to slander no one, to be completely peaceable, and to show true humility to everyone. Paul also explicitly warns Titus to have them avoid foolish controversies and useless arguments because they're just a complete waste of time.
But what about when things get toxic inside the group? When you're dealing with warped individuals who insist on causing division? Well, Paul was incredibly pragmatic about this. He hands Titus a simple 3-step procedural blueprint. Step 1, warn a divisive person once. Step 2, warn them a second time. Step 3, have nothing to do with them. Paul basically says that kind of person is self-condemned. It's a swift, decisive system designed purely to protect the health of the broader community.
As he wraps up the letter, Paul asks Titus to make sure some traveling colleagues, guys like Zenas the lawyer and Apollos, have exactly what they need for their journey. And by doing this, he beautifully reinforces the whole central thesis of the letter. The ultimate outcome of sound beliefs is a productive life devoted to doing good. Your beliefs have to translate into tangible, real-world help for daily necessities.
So I'm going to leave you with this incredibly provocative thought, directly inspired by Paul's fierce warning about those deceivers back in Crete. In chapter 1, he says, they claim to know God, but by their actions they deny him. That is the ultimate metric for everything we've unpacked today. What does your daily conduct actually broadcast about your deepest beliefs? Do your actions truly align with your claims? Take some time to chew on that, and we'll see you in the next explainer.